and we are getting ready for the next talk, which is entitled Curation versus Creation in OER, Taming the Beast. And our speakers, we have 3 speakers. They're all from Franklin and Marshall College: Anna Anderson, Kim Armstrong, Jialing Liu. I'm going to turn things over to the team from Franklin and Marshall.
Thanks, Carl. I had to make sure that I was unmuted at this point in time. So I hope everyone can hear me. I just want to say thanks to everyone who's joined us here today. We are really excited to share our OER adventure with others who have been on a similar journey or those who are contemplating creating an open resource textbook for their own classes. As you can see, there were 3 of us on the project: myself, Anna Anderson, and Jialing Liu. Anna and I more or less took point on the curating and creating of the 5 chapters of this Intermediate 1 Spanish textbook, while Jialing, as our only native speaker on the project, was bringing up the rear and editing materials about as quickly as we were creating them. So our names and titles and emails are on the screen, and we'll put that information in the chat towards the end of the presentation. So if you want to actually email us at any point in time, we're really happy to talk about the work that we did. We'll also put a link of the PDF slides, to the PDF slides for the presentation in case that you want to have that as well. So like most instructors, I think we have this love-hate relationship with any textbook that we use. You know, there's no denying they are really super convenient. They provide lots of ancillary materials. That online workbook with those auto-correcting exercises, you know, is a real benefit since it provides this quick feedback to students. You know, and they're really great when you have multiple sections. They're adaptable to different instructors. You know, so there's lots of conveniences that come with textbooks, but at the same time, we all know they're costly, which can be an obstacle for some students who are studying languages. You know, commercial textbooks are not updated yearly, and, you know, talking about Ricky Martin to students in 2022 is not exactly current. You know, and additionally, the technology still can be clunky, and we find that our students do complain about it. So because of this reasons, our department had already been talking about creating our own textbook for our beginning through Intermediate 1 sequence, but we found that we were really getting stymied just by the question of the work required, especially when many of us are engaging in research projects during the summer. But we had this really great opportunity that popped up in the spring of 2021, and many thanks to our OER librarian, Chris Barnes, who pointed it out to us. The Department of Education in Pennsylvania was offering what they called PA goal grants, and the goal stands for Open and Affordable Learning. And these were going to provide us with some seed money to get this off the ground. You know, we had already been thinking about the possibility of designing our own textbook, and I think that grant really, you know, sort of pushed us into doing this pretty quickly. You know, we really felt that we were ready, that we were ripe for just dipping our toes into the OER pond. But we did have a pretty ambitious timeline since we did all of this in 2.5 months and then piloted the textbook in 3 sections of our Intermediate 1 this past fall. So in discussing with our department, our goals were, you know, pretty uniform among everybody in our department. We really needed to have a textbook that was providing this seamless transition from our introductory textbook. You know, we didn't want to throw off themes or grammar points that would normally be covered, so we had to make sure that we were covering them in our product. Everybody really wanted us to have very strong explanations of the grammar that were easily understood by students, so that could be something they could read at home and work on other things during the class period of time. The quality of the materials really had to be on par with a commercial textbook. We had to be able to integrate it into our learning management system. We really wanted to be able to incorporate some of our local resources to make it relevant to students. And we still had to have those auto-correcting exercises that would include audio comprehension. So the platform that we decided to use was Libretexts, which is a free resource, and then we used H5P to create the exercises. So at this point, I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague Jialing, and she's going to talk a little bit more about our process.
Thank you, Kim. So Jialing here. I am going to walk everyone now through the process that we follow to create this OER textbook. First, we should take a look at how languages courses work at Franklin and Marshall College. There is a language requirement, and the students who choose Spanish take either 1, 2, or 3 courses, depending on placement. And these courses are Beginning Spanish 1, 2, and Intermediate Spanish 1. Before we created the OER textbook, our department used one single textbook from a given publisher for all levels. So that means that all chapters on that textbook were divided among the 3 levels. Intermediate Spanish 1 or third level Spanish is the first course to convert its materials with OER. The first time we piloted the OER textbook was during the fall of 2021. During that semester, 5 courses were offered at the Intermediate 1 level. 3 of those piloted the OER textbook, while the other 2 continue using the regular textbook. We did that in order to be able to do a formal assessment at the end of the semester to compare students' outcomes in all sections. During the assessment, we found out that students' outcomes were similar for all sections. So there were no significant differences between students using the OER textbook and those using the regular textbook. Also, students reported their satisfaction using the OER materials in a survey that was also conducted. To create our own OER textbook, we considered the topics both in grammar and content that are usually covered at this level of Spanish. We included those that are needed for students' learning outcomes at this level. We did add the countries that are presented in here, as you can see from our formal textbook, because many students taking Intermediate 1 come from the previous levels that use the traditional textbook. And we had to make sure that they had a logical progression of topics. And we also wanted to avoid repetition of the countries they have previously seen, right? Even though everything in our 5 chapter OER textbook is different from the former textbook. With this, we'll also maintain consistency among all sections of the same level, since not every section, as I said before, piloted the OER textbook, which again allowed us to do the assessment at the end of the term. Now I'm going to pass it on to Anna, who is going to talk about creating the templates.
Yeah, so, you know, we not only wanted to be consistent with the other non-OER sections of the course, just to make sure that students were having comparable experiences between classes, but we also wanted to maintain consistency within our course itself. And when you have multiple creators, that can sometimes be a challenge. So we created templates with the goal of maintaining consistency between chapters. Kim worked on 3 of the chapters and I created 2 of them. And so we wanted to make sure that our individual differences didn't result in different experiences for the students. And then maintaining consistency between similar materials, which I'll get to in a little bit. So our chapters looked like this in general. We started with an outline that listed our learning outcomes and gave students an idea of what they would be looking at during that chapter. Then we opened with our country of focus, some background information about the country, often with audio or video materials as well. And then we did a vocabulary focus related to the chapter themes, a grammar focus, a cultural topic kind of related to the chapter themes, and then a second vocabulary, a second grammar. And we always ended up with some sort of connection to our local F&M or Lancaster, Pennsylvania community. So all of our chapters kind of followed that same format, although of course with different materials. And then the other thing that we wanted to create templates for were the different styles of pages that we use specifically with the grammar pages, for example. So all of our grammar explanations, both the ones that Kim created and the ones I created, started with the grammar in context, some sort of text showing how it was used. an explanation of that use in English. And that was an important consideration. Some texts explain grammar in Spanish, some texts explain it in English. And so we had to be on the same page from the get-go. What language are we explaining this in? The charts, of course, that explain the different forms. And there again, we had to be consistent in deciding, for example, how we were going to, or if we were going to include vos and vosotros. And if anyone has questions on what we ended up deciding to do, happy to talk about that in the Q&A. We ended with a video recap of the topic. Those were often things that were pre-existing that we were able to find and incorporate, just to kind of cater to learners who maybe aren't, or who are maybe more audio or than visual or reading learners. And then we ended with some practice exercises to give ideas both individually and in groups in the classroom for how these structures could be practiced. However, not everything could be fully consistent, if you will, between sections, because there were some things that we weren't entirely sure how we wanted to do. So we were also open to experimenting with different formats when relevant. So for example, our grammar pages. Is it better to have all of the material related to one grammar point on one long page that students scroll through? Or is it better to break it into smaller pages and have them, in effect, turn the page? We weren't sure, so we tried some of each with the idea that we can go back later and if there's a clear preference one way or the other for our students, we can update that. But we thought it's better to experiment a little bit before making a decision based on just what we thought. And similarly, grading policies for the workbook. Did we want everything to be graded based on first attempt, best attempt? Do we want it to be completion grades? We left that open for individual instructors, and that was easily customizable based on the platform that we use, the H5P. So again, questions about that, we're happy to answer later. And now I will hand back to Jialing.
Thanks, Anna. Since the creation, so since there were 3 of us working on this project, organization was very, very important for everything. Since the creation of the chapters were divided between Kim and Anna to curate and create, for organizational purposes, once content was created, it was noted on a shared Excel document. And I will show in the next slide an example of how it looked like. This document was highly useful for me, the editor, to see what materials were ready to be reviewed and edited, right? It was also useful to avoid overwrites of information, since 2 people cannot be working on the same page at the same time, for instance, in Libretexts, without overwriting that information, right? So it was very important. It also serves as future reference for colleagues using this textbook to help guide them while they incorporate the textbook and materials into our learning management system. So here is a snapshot of how that document looks like. It was very important to note the specific chapter and the sections where the materials were located, the date of creation, or when it was ready to be reviewed. There was also a space for general comments between the collaborators. And once the material was reviewed, it would be noted in there as well. And that would specify what was edited in terms of general errors, if there were any, linguistics appropriateness, format, among other things were reviewed. So now I'm going to pass it again to Kim for the next session.
Thanks, Jialing. Obviously, we were curating materials and creating materials for the textbook. So, we have this mixture and creating new materials, especially for class activities, and then curating existing OER materials. This was always a part of the plan because of our abbreviated timeline. And as we were going through the process and then thinking about it afterwards for this presentation, we realized that we had some hard and fast rules for both curating and creating. And the first one for curating is this sense of don't be afraid to reuse materials. You know, why are we reinventing the wheel? There are dozens and dozens of videos explaining grammar in many different foreign languages. Now, you may say, I present the subjunctive in a way that is so clear to my students, they comment upon it in my student evaluation, and it's, you know, so helpful for them. You know, keep that part of it if that's the part that you want to create, but it may not necessarily be true for every grammar point. So that idea of looking at other OER texts and reusing what you can, you want to, when you're working on a timeline for this project, you really have to be judicious about what you want to create versus reusing materials that are already available and really, really good. So my second rule for curating was the idea of recycling. And I don't know if these are really words, but I think there's a way to upcycle and downcycle. So many of the materials that you might find can be adapted to the level that you're targeting, but may not have been originally prepared for that level. So I don't think we should ignore introductory or advanced text or conversational text. You can adapt them to your learners. So, you know, for sort of downcycling, more difficult material may just simply require more scaffolding to make it accessible to your students. You know, they just might need a little bit more help, more questions, you know, more, either highlighting words that they need to understand, or that the gloss will come up. And similarly, you can use less complex materials, but introduce more complex activities in order to align with the skills of your students. My third piece of advice is to record. So what you're seeing right now is a very short screenshot of all the links that I had for this project. There's something that's equally long that I wasn't able to get on the screen. You know, as you're searching for that perfect short video about the Galapagos Islands, and I was at one point, you know, you're inevitably going to find something else that is useful. You always think, I'm going to be able to come back to this with no problem. And I completely forgot where it was. So we really talked about keeping good records, bookmarking everything in a folder that is only for your OER project. And then on the next page, and on the next page, I think what's really important is to read the rules. You know, we started the project knowing that we would be creating some of our own materials, but curating others if we really wanted to finish the text on time and pilot it with our intermediate level students last fall. So curating the materials was key to getting the project up and going within that, you know, short time period. So knowing what materials we could use and exactly what the licenses were on those materials was very important. You have to know what you can adapt, what you can, yes, use without any cost, but that you can't change in any way, shape, or form. So the next page just talks about a couple of the resources that are available. I'm going to paste a longer list in the chat, and these are really some good OER starting points. So Anna's going to take over from here and talk about the creation process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, as Kim said, curating is an important part of at least our process, but there were some things that we chose to create. And some of the rules that we came up with for that are, first of all, making it relevant. One of the key things that we knew we wanted from our text was for it to draw students into our local community context. And that's something that commercial textbooks naturally can't do. So we did audio interviews, for example, with people from our campus community who are Spanish speakers. And we also included both, for example, links to podcasts or to news articles, or interviews with other people from our local Lancaster, Pennsylvania community, to be able to give our students the feeling that this is, that they are immersed in a larger Spanish-speaking culture at Franklin and Marshall, and not just learning about things that happen far away in other countries. The next thing, Kim already said reuse, but I'm going to reiterate reuse in a slightly different context. We all create our own supplementary materials for our classes, regardless of whether we're working with OER or with a commercial textbook. So that's great. Reuse what you have already created, and you can make all of your own supplementary materials OER by, for example, writing your own summaries of things, updating any images that you would use to Creative Commons licensed images. And then even if, for example, you're using a video or an article that is not licensed under Creative Commons, you can link to it in your open access text. You can't copy the original text, or you can't embed videos that aren't Creative Commons, but you can link to them. And so that helps a lot. And then sharing your own discussion questions or follow-up activities, for example, those are the kinds of things that we put a lot of time and thought into that we can include in our open access texts. And then here's an example of a previous activity in my course. I talked about traditional medicine in Bolivia, Kayawayas, Hampiris, Yatiris. And so in order to make that open access, I did my own summary in the first column, just a brief overview, included Creative Commons licensed pictures, but then I linked to the UNESCO webpage and the UNESCO videos that I always had my students watch in or out of class anyway, and then put my own discussion questions on the page. So this is a page in our textbook that is totally open access, but makes use of the work that I had already done in previous versions of this course. And then number 7, the rule would be renovate. And what I mean by that is you can update existing materials. You can blend what already exists. So for example, for our command page, I found 2 different existing pages that I liked parts of one and parts of the other. I was able to combine them together and add my own twist on things. And that can be done license permitting. I want to do a little asterisk about the ND Creative Commons descriptor, which is non-derivative. You cannot change anything that has ND. If it doesn't have ND, you should be fine. And then adding in your own touches to different things. So start with an existing vocabulary list and then eliminate it or add to it to meet your own needs, or change which country some of the vocab comes from. So you can combine creating and curating in a way that helps you streamline the process and still make it your own. And then the golden rule, Kim and I both have touched on this, so I'm going to reiterate it again. Reuse what you can, whether that's things other people have created, whether that's things you've created, whether that's things that already exist online that you want to link to. Reuse what you can, because it really does help things go faster. And it there's no point in putting in all of the work when there are lots of really quality materials out there. We created only what we really thought was most impactful, our local stuff, some suggested interactive activities, a few grammar explanations, but really we reused what we were able to. I will pass it on.
Okay, and just because, you know, we certainly would love to get feedback. We would love to know if other people are using the materials. This is an example of what you would see when you first go into Libretexts to find the book. And you'll see that there's the 5 chapters and then front matter, back matter, etc. So just a peek inside. And then the next slide. This is chapter 1, El Arte de Comer, and you'll see that it was a pretty robust project for us. It has a lot of materials that we can use. Anna and I were both the ones piloting this last semester and said to ourselves, oh my God, we created too much material. We can't actually use it all in class. So we actually did have to pick and choose some of the ancillary materials that we were using. And then we'll go to another one. This is another example of the Voces de FEM. This is what Anna worked on very particularly for all the chapters. This was a colleague of ours who was talking about a very favorite dessert that his grandmother would make. And then that ended up being a touch point in class for me to talk to students about, you know, what foods they felt like reminded them of home and family. And then this is just an example of creation. So when we were in chapter 4, we were talking about technology, and I decided, you know, it would be really great to talk about consumerism with them for a little bit, since our students are big consumers. We're all big consumers. So this was a picture that I found, which I thought was really interesting, and it was a point of departure for conversation. And then an example of curation that we did for the same chapter. As Anna said, there is a link here that goes to an article, but this had some of the key points of those articles. Again, so it was sort of, reusing or revitalizing some things that I couldn't necessarily give them as it was because it was just too complex. So we had to use it as it was. And then I think we have one more slide. Yep. And this is an example of an H5P. Anna had created this just to practice the subjunctive and the indicative. And I think that's basically it. So we're open to questions. We still have some time to be able to do that. I'm going to post our emails in the chat so that you can contact us a little bit more easily. But would love to have any feedback. So if people want to go out and take a look and give us some feedback, we would love to have your impressions of the project. So at this point, we're open to questions.
So thank you guys so much. This was terrific. You had lots of great information and tips for people considering doing OER. Curating, the importance of curating your materials, the importance of reading the rules. I was actually clapping when you were saying that. That's so fundamental to know what the Creative Commons licenses are. You need to become somewhat familiar with that. In fact, when we have a question, the first question is about SA, share alike. What exactly does that mean? Do you want to handle that, or somebody's asking about the share alike, CC by SA?
Can I clarify my question?
Yes.
Okay, so if I find a section in a OER that I want to incorporate into my own OER, such as a Pressbooks, right? And I want to take something and put it in mine. Am I allowed to take the text, that short piece of a portion of the OER and include it in my text, or do I have to link out to the OER? Because I'm not sure if my question is it share alike or non-derivative, but are there limits on taking a little part of somebody's OER and including it in mine?
Yeah, I can answer that. So yeah, what you were concerned about is the non-derivative where you can't make any modifications. You can't take just a small part. Share alike, you certainly can, as my understanding. The only thing is you can't add additional restrictions. So if their license is,
right,
if their license allows for derivatives, you can't put it on a non-derivative license at that point. You have to have the same openness of license that they have.
Totally get it. So it's the non-derivative part that would preclude me from being able to chop it up into a chunk and take it. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I just want to add to that. So it's a bit of a misnomer. Share alike means really license alike.
Right.
You have to adopt the same license. So and in general, it's not really true to say they're open licenses and closed licenses. They're degrees of openness that people are putting on. And so your question is really fundamentally about compatibility. And it's a tricky question. I will say that on Creative Commons, their website, they have this kind of handy dandy tip sheet where you look at compatibility to see how these match up, because it can get confusing.
Okay, and then as just a follow-up, if it was not non-derivative and I did take a small section of somebody else's OER and put it into mine, you always do have to cite the original OER, correct? Okay.
Always, yes, always. So every license, every CC license has a by. By means attribution. So here we have by the team from Franklin Marshall College. You have to give, and that's for every single open license, because in education, right?
I was going to say, and one of the things that we often did was you put at the bottom of the screen, adapted from, link to the original page by original authors, so that you can say that it's not just a copy of theirs, but you're still giving credit.
Right. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Oh, Charlotte asked if I'll post the link to the page on compatibility. Yes, I will, Charlotte. I'm just. And again, let me give a shout out for our plenary talk, which is by the head person at Creative Commons, and she will also be talking about the importance of learning the fundamentals of copyright and how to read the licenses.
I'm seeing a bunch of questions briefly in the chat about H5P. Can we comment on those briefly?
Sure.
Okay. Kim, do you want to talk about?
Yeah. So, you know, there's a platform that's called H5P, and that's what we used in order to be able to create all of our exercises. And H5P, you can integrate H5P into Libretext. They are allowing people to do that as well. But the problem is that you actually can't get that to come into your grade book. So we were using H5P regularly from the company and creating all our materials on their website. And the reason for that is we have instructors that like to count that as homework, and it's part of the grade. So we had to be able to bring that into our LMS, which is Canvas. So it's really nice is that it integrates. And if you want students to get a grade for that, you know, you just say, you know, count this as part of the final grade. It's, you know, in the assignments, and you know, the grade is actually coming right in. I don't use that in particular. I have a sort of, you know, those exercises are there for you. I'm not grading them, the machine is. So it's really what you want to do, but that does bring a cost to it once you're integrating it into Canvas in the way that we are. And that grant that we have has helped to pay for that for right now.
So I'm going to have to end things there. I want to thank the team from Franklin Marshall. This was terrific. You gave so much good advice. And remember that this is recorded, so you can go back and listen to them again. Let's see, Natalie Steinfeld has posted in the chat a link that responds to Charlotte's question about the compatibility page. And we at COERLL, we have an entire course on these kinds of issues, like how to get started on doing OER. And so we have a module on how to navigate these different kinds of licenses. Thanks to everybody, and we'll have just a bit of a break. The next one starts in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.